The courtroom silence. The courtroom was silent. Not a single whisper, not a cough. Not even the rustle of papers dared disturb the heavy air. People sat straight on the long wooden benches, their eyes fixed on the man standing at the center of it all, Sundar Pichai. He wore a simple gray suit, neat and calm, but his eyes told a different story. They were tired, filled with questions, yet strong like someone who had been through storms and never stopped walking. A week ago, Sundar had never imagined he'd be standing here, not as a witness, not as a guest, but as someone being questioned, doubted, and worst of all, judged. The judge, an older man with sharp glasses and a colder tone, stared down at him like Sundar was an inconvenience. "Mr. Pichai," the judge said slowly, dragging each syllable like it was too heavy to carry, "you expect this court to believe that you, the CEO of one of the world's largest tech companies, walked into this matter out of kindness?" A low murmur passed through the room. Sundar didn't blink. He stood firm. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied, his voice steady. "And you had no business interest, no financial gain, no reason at all. Except what? Kindness?" Sundar nodded. "She needed help. No one else was helping." The judge leaned back. His expression was a mix of disbelief and disdain. "Kindness," he repeated, almost as if the word offended him. This wasn't just any trial. It started with something small, a simple eviction case involving an elderly woman named Kamala, who had been thrown out of her home. No one thought it would turn into something bigger. No one except Sundar. A week earlier, Sundar had been walking down a quiet street in Delhi after a private tech meeting. He liked to walk without security, without noise. It made him feel human again. That's when he saw her, an old woman sitting on the footpath, surrounded by a few worn-out bags, holding a file of papers tightly in her lap. She looked lost, but not defeated. He paused, unsure why. Something about her eyes reminded him of his mother. He walked closer. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked. She looked up, startled. Her eyes were red but proud. "Do I look all right to you, Beta?" she said, trying to smile. Sundar sat down beside her. People stared as they walked by, surprised to see a well-dressed man talking to someone like her. "What happened?" he asked gently. She opened her file, hands trembling. It was full of documents, legal notices, property records. Her story spilled out. Her late husband had built that small house 40 years ago. After he died, she stayed alone. One day, a stranger knocked and claimed her house belonged to his company now. She had no children, no lawyer, no money. "They threw me out," she whispered, "like trash." Sundar took the papers. His face changed as he read. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He asked for her name. "Kamala Devi," she said. He took her to a nearby tea stall, bought her food, and then, without telling her who he was, promised, "I'll look into this." Kamala smiled. "You're too kind. The world is not kind anymore." He nodded quietly. That night he called his legal team not as a CO, but as a citizen. He asked them to dig deeper. By morning they found it. The company that claimed Kamala's house was built on forged documents. It wasn't an error. It was planned. Sundar knew the name of the real estate tycoon behind it. A man used to silence. A man with friends in power. He also knew what would happen if he pushed this. The media would follow. People would talk. And that man, Rajat Malik, would fight back. But Sundar didn't stop. He filed a legal petition in court, using his name, his identity, and his truth. And now here he was, standing in front of a judge who seemed more annoyed than interested. "Why involve yourself, Mr. Pichai?" the judge asked again. "What's in it for you?" "Nothing," Sundar said. "Except doing what's right." The judge looked unconvinced. Then, from the back of the room, Rajat Malik walked in. His arrival shifted the room's energy. He wore an expensive suit, walked with arrogance, and carried the air of someone who believed money could buy silence. He took a seat behind the defense lawyer and smirked. Sundar didn't flinch. The judge noticed the shift too. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Malik," he said, "you are not a party in this trial." "Of course, Your Honor," Rajat replied with a nod. "I'm just observing." The judge continued. "This court will take a recess. We will resume shortly." As the judge left, murmurs filled the room again. Cameras outside clicked, journalists whispered, and Sundar quietly walked to the bench where Kamala sat. She touched his hand. "You're doing too much," she whispered. "They will make you suffer for it." He looked at her, then at Rajat, who was watching them with quiet mockery. "Then let them try," Sundar said. Outside the courtroom, a journalist caught up to Sundar. "Sir, is it true you're doing all this for one woman you met on the street?" "Yes," he replied without stopping. "Aren't you worried this will affect your image, your role at Google?" Sundar paused. "Image is not as important as impact," he said. "What's the use of success if you can't help someone when it truly matters?" That night, news channels aired the story. Some called it a publicity stunt. Some called it foolish. But one young boy in a small village watched that clip and said to his mother, "One day, I want to be like him." The next morning, the courtroom was packed again. People now knew who Sundar really was. Not just a CEO, not just a tech mind, but a man who dared to stand up. The judge entered, face unreadable. He sat down and looked at the file in front of him. "This case," he said slowly, "has become more than just a property dispute. It now tests something deeper, whether truth matters in a system built on power." Then he looked at Sundar. "You may proceed, Mr. Pichai." Sundar stood holding a document. "Your Honor, this is the original land record from 38 years ago, signed by the municipal authority and Kamala Devi's late husband. It matches the survey map filed 2 months ago. The fake record submitted by Rajat Malik's company contains a forged seal, one that wasn't even used until 10 years later." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. "My legal team verified this through the National Archives and filed a notarized affidavit," Sundar added, handing the papers to the bailiff. The judge examined them. Rajat Malik shifted in his seat. But Sundar wasn't done. "This isn't about a house, it's about dignity. She lived there for 40 years. No one questioned it until she became weak and alone." The judge looked at him sharply. "You're saying this was intentional?" "Yes," Sundar said. "And it's not just her. I found 6 other similar cases linked to the same company." The room broke into chaos. The judge banged the gavel. "Order! Order!" Then he said, "This court will review the new evidence. We will reconvene after lunch break." As Sundar walked back, Rajat got up and blocked his path. "You think you're a hero?" Rajat said, barely above a whisper. Sundar stared into his eyes. "I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to be human." Before Rajat could respond, a voice called out from the bench behind them. It was a woman, well-dressed, strong voice. "I was evicted too by his company." Another voice joined. "Me too." Within seconds, 3 more stood up. The judge, still seated, looked stunned. But Sundar remained silent. He simply turned and sat next to Kamala, who was holding back tears. And then, without warning, the judge stood and said, "Court is adjourned for today." People rushed forward. Reporters clicked pictures. The room buzzed with tension and truth. As Sundar stepped outside the court building, someone from the crowd shouted his name. He turned. A man pushed through the crowd and handed him a file. "They took my mother's house too," the man said. "Please help us." Sundar took the file. The weight of what he had started was becoming clear, but he didn't walk away. He looked at the building, the flag above it, and whispered, "This is just the beginning." The silent burden. The next morning began with rain, gentle, at first like a soft warning, then stronger, heavier, washing the streets of Delhi in a gray silence. Outside the courthouse, umbrellas opened like dark flowers, and inside Sundar Pichai's hotel room there was no noise except the ticking of an old wall clock and the quiet hum of his thoughts. He hadn't slept much. His mind was full, not with fear, but with weight. He sat at the small table by the window, sipping plain tea. Beside him lay two files, one for Kamala Devi and the other for the new man who had come forward yesterday. Both files were thick with injustice, both filled with names of people who had been silenced by forged documents in powerful hands. Sundar stared at them. They weren't just papers. They were people. Every form, every signature, every stamp had been used like a weapon against the weak. And for everyone like Kamala who fought back, there were hundreds who didn't even try. Maybe they didn't know how. Maybe they gave up. Maybe no one cared. He couldn't forget the man who handed him the file yesterday. He had said nothing more than a single sentence. Please, help us. But those 3 words were louder than the storm outside. As he looked at the window, the water sliding down, the glass reminded him of something. His childhood, a small house in Chennai, his mother sitting by the window, sewing quietly, his father returning late from work, exhausted but smiling. They didn't have much, but they had dignity, and that made all the difference. Now, years later, he had everything: fame, power, wealth. But he still held on to that memory of a small house where respect was the richest thing they owned. A knock broke his thoughts. His assistant Raghav entered. "Sir, your car is ready. The hearing starts in an hour." Sundar nodded and stood up. "Any updates?" Raghav hesitated. "Yes, but it's not good." He handed Sundar a printed article. It was from a popular news channel. The headline read, "Tech CEO turns courtroom into stage. Publicity stunt or genuine concern?" Beneath it was a photo of Sundar walking with Kamala, cropped to look dramatic. Sundar read silently. "They think it's a show," he said finally. "Some do," Raghav replied, "but others are starting to pay attention." Sundar didn't react. He folded the paper and placed it aside. "Let's go," he said. The courthouse was packed again, but today it felt different. There was tension in the air, but also something else, hope. People had started gathering outside, not just media, but regular people. Many held up signs with messages like, "We believe you, Sundar, and justice for the forgotten." They didn't shout. They didn't chant. They just stood, quietly, with eyes full of expectation. Inside, the judge entered quickly and sat down with urgency. His tone was sharper than yesterday. "This court is not a political platform," he began. "We will examine evidence, not emotions." Sundar stood and nodded respectfully. "Your Honor," he said, "we have reviewed 3 new cases linked to the same fraudulent network. Each case involves elderly homeowners who were evicted based on false property claims. I request permission to submit these documents for court review." The judge glanced at Rajat Malik's lawyer, who immediately stood. "Your Honor," he said, "this is irrelevant. This case is about one woman, not a movement." "With respect," Sundar replied, "this is about a pattern. If one crime is repeated 5 times with the same method, it is no longer an exception. It becomes a system." The courtroom murmured in agreement. Kamala, sitting in the front row, held her hands tightly in her lap. Her eyes were filled with quiet strength. Beside her, the man from yesterday nodded slowly. The judge rubbed his forehead. "Very well," he said. "Submit the files." As the papers were passed forward, Rajat Malik leaned back in his seat, eyes narrowing. Sundar continued, "I also request the court to allow testimony from Ms. Kamala Devi herself. Her voice has been missing from these papers. I believe it's time we hear it." The judge looked down. "Ms. Devi, are you willing?" Kamala stood up slowly. Her knees shook a little, but her spirit did not. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. She walked to the front and stood at the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in, and the room fell into complete silence. "Please tell the court your story," the judge said. Kamala looked around, then began. Her voice was soft, but every word struck deep. "I was born in 1948, she said. "I was a baby when this country became free. I have seen wars, floods, and loss. I lost my husband to a heart attack 30 years ago. I have cooked food for others, Cleaned floors, sold handkerchiefs, anything to survive. She paused. But I never begged, and I never stole. She lifted her head. 3 months ago, someone knocked on my door and said I had to leave. They said I was living on someone else's land. I showed them my papers, they laughed. They had more papers with newer stamps, bigger seals. They pushed me out. Her voice cracked, but she continued. For 40 years, that house was mine. My husband built it with his hands. We painted the walls together. I planted a neem tree in front when my son was born. He died as a child, but that tree still stands. A tear slipped down her cheek. I begged them to let me stay one more night. They said no. They threw my things on the street. That file in your hand, sir, she said to the judge, was all I could carry. The judge looked down at the file. If Mr. Sundar had not stopped that day, she said, turning toward him, I don't know where I would be. Maybe under a bridge, maybe dead. She took a breath. People say he's a rich man. Powerful. They say he has everything. But that day, he gave me something no one else would. Respect. The courtroom was still. Not a single breath could be heard. The judge finally spoke. Thank you, Ms. Devi. Please take your seat. Kamala walked back, holding her head high. The judge turned to the defense. Do you wish to cross-examine? Raja Malik's lawyer stood, paused, then shook his head. No, Your Honor. That surprised everyone, but Sundar wasn't surprised. He knew why. Their strategy was shifting, not in the courtroom, but outside. Later that evening, as Sundar sat in his hotel, another file arrived. This one wasn't delivered by hand. It was slipped under his door. He picked it up, opened it, and froze. Inside was a photo of his old family house in Chennai. A red X had been drawn over it, and beneath the photo, a single typed line. Stop digging, where you don't belong. Raghav, who had just entered, saw it too. His face turned pale. Sir, we need to report this. Sundar nodded, but his eyes stayed on the photo. They're scared, he said quietly. Or desperate, Raghav added. Sundar folded the photo and placed it inside his jacket. Either way, he said, I won't stop. That night, news broke again. A senior reporter released leaked documents that revealed connections between Rajat Malik's company and 2 retired officials from the Land Registry Office. Forged signatures, altered survey maps, fake deeds. The story exploded. People began protesting. Hashtags flooded social media. Justice for Kamala. Stand with Sundar. Homes, not lies, but with every rising voice. The threats grew louder too. A stone was thrown at the hotel gate. Someone slashed the tires of his driver's car. And still, Sundar refused to back down. He gave no interviews. He made no speeches. He just kept gathering the truth. On the 3rd day, a new witness appeared, a former clerk who used to work in the land office. His name was Omkar, and he was afraid. His hands shook as he held the mic. I was paid, he admitted. Paid to process fake documents, but I didn't know whose house it was. I just followed orders. Whose orders? The judge asked. Omkar looked at Rajat Malik. Silence. The courtroom froze. His, Omkar said. Gasps. Rajat's lawyer jumped. Up. Objection, noted. The judge replied. But the statement stands. Rajat stood up, furious. This is all lies. You think money makes me evil? What about him? He pointed at Sundar. He's not poor. Why is he the hero? Judge banged his gavel. Sit down, Mr. Malik. Rajat didn't move. Then Sundar stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. He simply said, I'm not a hero. I just didn't look away. And that moment, quiet, powerful, unshaken, cut through the courtroom like lightning. The judge looked at him, and for the first time since this trial began, his expression changed, not to anger, but to something softer, something that looked like respect. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside the courtroom, the storm had just begun. The weight of truth. The morning sun rose behind thick clouds, casting a pale golden light on the city. The courthouse steps were no longer empty. People gathered in silence. Students, elderly men, single mothers, office workers. They brought no banners. They held no microphones. But they had come for one reason. They had come for the truth. Inside, Sundar Pichai stood in front of a mirror in his hotel room, tying his shoes slowly. Behind him, Raghav scrolled through messages on his phone. "They're calling. At the people's trial," Raghav said. "Your face is everywhere." Sundar didn't respond. He reached for his blazer and paused for a moment. He knew that this day might be harder than all the others. He wasn't just walking into a courtroom anymore. He was walking into a battlefield of influence, power, and deep-rooted corruption. "How's Kamala ji?" he asked. "She didn't sleep well," Raghav replied. "She's nervous, but she said she will stand if she has to." Sundar nodded. Then he picked up a thin notebook he kept beside his bed. It was old, filled with handwritten thoughts. On the first page were 4 words: "Dignity is not negotiable." He slipped it into his coat pocket, took a deep breath, and walked out. The courtroom was already packed. Journalists filled the corners. Court clerks shuffled documents. The judge, firm but more focused than ever, took his seat without looking at anyone. On the defense side, Rajat Malik sat with a forced smile. His suit was darker today, sharper, like he was preparing for war. Beside him sat a new man, a different lawyer, older, colder, and rumored to be one of the most expensive legal minds in the country. "This is no longer just a property case," the judge began. "Multiple testimonies, forged documents, and now witness threats have been brought to light. This court will treat the matter with the gravity it deserves." He turned to Sundar. "Mr. Pichai, do you have anything to present today?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sundar replied. "Today I will present the pattern, the mechanism used to evict over a dozen families in the last 2 years under the same company name." He held up a file thicker than any before. Each case followed the same path. First a low offer to purchase, then pressure, then eviction notices backed by false claims. Families who resisted were pushed out anyway, some without even a hearing. He passed the file to the court officer. "This file includes affidavits from 9 victims, police reports, and matching land office discrepancies. This is not a coincidence. This is a system designed to target the voiceless." The courtroom shifted. People sat forward in their seats. Rajat's new lawyer stood. His voice was smooth but sharp. "Your Honor," he began, "we do not deny that errors occur in land documentation. This is a known challenge in this country. However, to place the blame on a respected businessman, simply because Mr. Pichai chooses to become emotionally involved, is dangerous." He turned toward Sundar. "This is not Silicon Valley, sir. This is a court of law." Sundar didn't blink. "And law must protect those who cannot protect themselves," he said calmly. The lawyer smiled coldly. "Is that what you think you are doing? Saving the helpless? Or are you simply trying to clean your image by becoming a public messiah?" "I'm not trying to be anything," Sundar answered. "I'm trying not to be silent." The judge tapped his gavel once. "No personal attacks. Proceed with your evidence, Mr. Pichai." As the trial moved forward, something unexpected happened. 2 more people stood up in the back row and requested to speak. The judge, cautious but curious, allowed it. The first was a woman in her 40s. She stood shakily but with purpose. "They threw my father out of our ancestral home. He died 3 months later in a hospital. Heart failure, they said. But I know it wasn't that. It was heartbreak." Her voice cracked. His last words were, "I built that house with my hands. Why are they taking it from me?" The second was a boy barely 20. "They tried to take my mother's tea shop, said it was on government land. But she's been running that shop for 15 years. That's how we paid for school. I watched them throw her stove onto the street." His voice shook with anger. No one helped. Until now. The judge sat still. But behind his glasses, his eyes had changed. What had begun as one woman's fight was now a mirror held up to the nation. During the recess, Sundar sat with Kamala on a bench outside. She looked tired. "You should have never gotten involved, Beta," she said. "Why do you say that?" "Because I don't want you to get hurt. This world doesn't like good people who speak loudly." Sundar smiled softly. "My mother once said that same thing to me when I was a child." Kamala looked at him. "What did you do?" "I kept speaking." She laughed gently. "Your mother must be proud." "I hope so," he said. Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Raghav. Media leaked a video. It's spreading fast. He clicked it. It was CCTV footage from the land office, dated 6 months ago. It showed 2 men entering a file room late at night. One of them was Omkar. The other was Rajat Malik's personal assistant. The caption read, "Proof of tampering." The video had already reached 1 million views in an hour. Sundar looked up. "This is going to turn ugly," he said. And he was right. That evening, back in the courtroom, tension reached a new high. The judge was handed the video in a sealed envelope. After reviewing it privately, he made an announcement. "This court will issue a notice to the property registrar's office for a full investigation. We will also call in forensic experts to verify document authenticity." Rajat's lawyer objected. "This is a media stunt." But the judge dismissed him with a single look. "This is justice." Rajat stood up, face red with rage. "You can't do this. I built this empire. I've helped thousands. Now you believe some old woman and a tech CEO with a savior complex?" His voice rose. "This is a circus." The judge stood. His voice was calm but thunderous. "Sit down, Mr. Malik. This is not your stage." Rajat didn't move. Then Sundar rose slowly. "Mr. Malik," he said, "this is not about you. It never was. You think you're better than me? No. But I know this. If you destroy 100 homes to build one tower, that tower will fall. Maybe not today, but soon." Rajat's mouth opened to respond, but before he could, the judge banged his gavel. "Enough. This court is adjourned until tomorrow. We will resume with testimony from the forensic team." The room exploded into whispers. People began to stand. Sundar turned to leave, but as he did, a woman approached him. She wore a white sari and held a folded paper in her hand. "My husband worked in that office," she said. "He died last year. Before he passed, he left this letter. He said if anything ever went wrong, someone should see this." She handed it to Sundar. "Why give it to me?" he asked. "Because you're the only one not looking away." Sundar opened the letter. Inside was a list of names. Names of officials, dates, signatures, all linked to forged records. He folded it carefully. "Thank you," he said. As he stepped outside, the clouds began to gather again, but this time there was no storm, just a quiet sky, holding its breath. Back in his room, Sundar placed the letter beside the notebook his mother had given him years ago. He looked at both for a long time. Then he wrote a new line under his old words. "Truth is heavier than power, but it can carry more." His phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was from an unknown number. "You're making enemies, Sundar. Walk away, before it's too late." He didn't reply. He just turned the phone face down and stared out at the city. He had no armor, no bodyguards, just the truth, and a quiet promise to a woman who planted a neem tree. The tree that refused to fall. The 4th day began in silence. No wind, no horns, no crowds shouting outside the court building. It was as if the entire city had taken a long breath and was holding it, waiting for something to break the stillness. Inside Sundar's hotel room, the air was heavy with tension, but he moved with calm precision, wearing the same kind of quiet resilience that had carried him through boardrooms, conferences, and now, courtrooms. He glanced at the small notebook he always kept in his pocket. His mother's handwriting on the inside cover reminded him who he was. Truth doesn't shake when tested, it roots deeper. Beneath it, he had added his own line the night before. Truth is heavier than power, but it can carry more. Today, that weight felt heavier than ever. As he buttoned his coat, Raghav entered with a pale look on his face. There's something you need to see, Raghav said, holding his phone like it carried poison. Sundar took it. A video had been leaked overnight. It showed a meeting that had taken place months ago, inside a luxury clubroom. Rajat Malik, 2 retired government officials, and a man who looked like a senior judge. They were laughing, toasting glasses, and discussing clearing obstacles. The audio was shaky, but one sentence was crystal clear. That old woman won't even know what hit her. Sundar's eyes hardened. He returned the phone. Do we know who recorded it? Anonymous source. Probably someone fed up. Sundar nodded. He didn't speak. Are you okay? Raghav asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward the window and watched the city move below. Cars, people, life going on as usual, even while something deeply wrong was being exposed piece by piece. I'm okay, he said. But this is bigger than I thought. Should we bring in security? No, not yet. We need witnesses, not walls. By the time they reached the courthouse, there were more people than ever before. Some held signs. Others simply stood in silence. Among the crowd, an elderly couple had placed a garland around a small photo of their demolished home. A child offered flowers to Kamala Devi as she walked past with Sundar. She touched the child's head gently. Why are you giving me flowers, Beta? She asked. The girl looked up, eyes shining. Because you're not afraid. Kamala smiled, then looked at Sundar. You brought them here. He shook his head. They came for the truth, not for me. Inside, the courtroom atmosphere had completely changed. The judge, who had been reserved and stern, now seemed alert, cautious, but deeply engaged. In front of him were 2 reports, one from the forensic team confirming document forgery, and another summarizing the leaked video, which was now part of public record. Sundar stepped forward. Your Honor, I request this court to accept the letter handed to me yesterday evening. It was written by a late land office official. He listed names of colleagues involved in document tampering. This letter was not published or shared with media. It has been sealed and notarized. He handed the envelope to the officer. The judge examined it carefully. After reading the contents for several long minutes, he looked up. This court accepts the document into evidence. He turned to Rajat Malik. Mr. Malik, do you have anything to say? Rajat stood. He no longer wore the confident smirk. His hands were clenched, jaw stiff. Your Honor, I am being framed. All this, videos, letters, stories, they're distractions. I have built schools, hospitals, I employ thousands. Why would I throw old women into the street? Sundar stepped forward again. Because they had something you wanted and you thought they couldn't fight back. Rajat's voice cracked. You think you're better than me? No, Sundar said calmly. But I believe in something stronger than wealth. I believe in fairness. The judge tapped his pen twice. We will hear closing statements tomorrow. This court is adjourned for the day. People began murmuring. Some stood. But Sundar remained still. He knew what was coming next would be harder than all the days before. Outside the courthouse, something unexpected happened. As Sundar stepped into the crowd, a man in plain clothes walked up and whispered, Sir, step back. There's a threat. Before he could respond, a commotion broke out on the far side of the crowd. A car sped off, leaving behind a small package wrapped in black tape. Police rushed in. The crowd scattered. Bomb squad is on the way, an officer shouted. Kamala, standing beside Sundar, gripped his arm tightly. They want to scare you, she whispered. They want to scare all of us, he replied. Hours later at the station, the package was confirmed to be a fake bomb. A threat, nothing more. But it was clear now. Sundar had crossed a line that powerful people didn't want him to cross. Still, he didn't stop. That night, he went to see Kamala Devi. She was staying in a shelter organized by volunteers who had seen her story online. She was sitting on a wooden cot, feeding a stray cat with leftover rice. You should be sleeping, Sundar said. You should be resting, she replied. He sat beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then she pointed toward a sapling growing in a small pot beside her bed. Someone gave me this, she said. They said it's a neem tree, just like the one I planted at my old house. He looked at it carefully. Its leaves were green, reaching for light. Do you think I'll ever see my tree again? She asked. Sundar didn't lie. I don't know. But I promise, no one else will live there unless you do. Her eyes filled with tears. But she didn't let them fall. I used to feel invisible, she said softly. Until you saw me. He nodded slowly. You're not invisible anymore. The next morning, Sundar woke to hundreds of messages, but one caught his attention. It was from a school principal in a remote village. He wrote, "We watched your story in class. Our students asked why no one had helped that woman sooner. One boy said, 'When I grow up, I'll be the kind of man who helps like Sundar Pichai.'" Sundar read it twice. Then he closed his eyes. This was the reason he had stepped into the storm. Not to win, not to shine, but to light a fire in someone else's heart. Back in court, closing arguments began. Rajat Malik's lawyer spoke first. He delivered a long, complicated defense, full of legal jargon, half-facts, and emotional redirection. He called the leaked video a deep fake. He called the witnesses emotionally manipulated. He called Sundar a man with too much power and too little understanding of the real world. Then he sat down. The room turned to Sundar. He walked to the center slowly, then paused. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't read from notes. He spoke, plainly. "Your Honor, this case was never supposed to be mine. I didn't come looking for it. I found it because I stopped to ask a woman if she was okay." He looked at Kamala. That one question changed everything. He turned back to the judge. "We can create technology that answers billions of questions a day. But what's the use if we ignore the questions that stare us in the face?" He stepped closer. "This is not about one house or one woman or one mistake. This is about whether we see people who suffer or whether we keep walking." He paused again. "We can build smarter cities, taller buildings, and faster networks. But unless we build fairness into our systems, none of it matters." He bowed his head slightly. "I rest my case." The room was silent, not because it had to be, but because no one wanted to break that moment. Outside the court, the neem sapling sat on the steps. No one knew who placed it there, but someone had written a note beside it. Even when you cut it down, it grows back stronger. The verdict, no one expected. The courthouse buzzed with quiet tension on the fifth day. Birds flew in circles above the grand dome, as if even they sensed that something important was about to happen. People gathered from across the city. Many had no connection to the case, no personal stake in the outcome, but they came anyway, because something inside them needed to see if justice still meant something. Inside, the courtroom doors opened slowly. People entered with silent urgency, their eyes not on the marble floors or the wooden benches, but on the front, where the judge would soon speak, where Sundar Pichai sat, dressed simply in a charcoal gray suit, his notebook tucked into the inner pocket of his jacket. Where Kamala Devi, wrapped in a soft beige shawl, sat beside him, her hands folded in prayer without sound. Sundar didn't look tired. Not exactly. He looked steady, like someone who had been carrying a weight so long that his back had adjusted to it. He spoke little that morning. Only to Raghav, once. "Are you ready for whatever happens?" Raghav had asked. Sundar had replied, "I was ready the moment I asked her if she was okay." And now there was nothing else to say. The judge entered the room at exactly 10 a.m. Everyone rose. A respectful silence swept across the gallery like a wave. The judge sat. His robe looked heavier today. Maybe it was just the moment. Or maybe it was the truth sitting with him. He adjusted his glasses, took a long breath, and began. "This case has revealed more than any of us expected," he said slowly. "What began as a single dispute over a small property has pulled back the curtain on a larger system. A system that punishes the poor, favors the powerful, and buries justice under paperwork. He paused. The testimonies presented, the documents reviewed, and the expert analysis provided have created a picture that is impossible to ignore. His eyes scanned the room. They stopped briefly on Sundar, then on Rajat Malik, who sat with his arms crossed and eyes narrowed. "Mr. Rajat Malik," the judge said, "this court finds sufficient grounds to launch a criminal investigation into your company's property dealings. All assets linked to the disputed properties will be frozen pending inquiry. You will surrender your passport to the registrar immediately." A gasp swept through the room. Rajat stood up. "You can't do this," he shouted. The judge's gavel slammed down. Once, twice. "Sit down," he said, "or be removed from the court." Rajat slowly sat, his face flushed with rage. "As for Ms. Kamala Devi," the judge continued, turning his voice gentler, "this court recognizes her as the legal owner of her property. The eviction is nullified. The house is to be returned to her immediately, with all associated costs paid by the state." Kamala's eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She simply pressed her hands together and bowed her head. Sundar gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. The judge wasn't done. "Finally," he said, "this court wishes to recognize the actions of Mr. Sundar Pichai, not because of his position or his wealth, but because he chose to act when he could have remained silent." A quiet murmur moved through the gallery. The judge closed the file in front of him. "This hearing is adjourned, but this story is not over. This court encourages all citizens to remember, justice begins when someone decides to care." The gavel fell one final time. Outside, the crowd erupted into applause. Not the kind that follows celebrity. Not the loud, empty clapping of a stage performance. This applause was full, like something sacred had been returned. Cameramen rushed forward. Journalists shouted questions. Social media platforms exploded. Sundar wins court battle for Kamala. Devisa turns silent fighter for justice. The trial that made a nation look again, but Sundar didn't stop to pose. He didn't wave or give a speech. He simply helped Kamala down the stairs, step by step, through the sea of people. Someone tried to shove a microphone in front of her. "Ma'am, how do you feel?" the reporter asked breathlessly. Kamala looked up, her voice clear, like the wind finally changed direction. An hour later, Sundar and Kamala returned to her home, or what was left of it. The house had been stripped bare. Walls covered in dirt, windows cracked, the neem tree in the front yard chopped down to a stump. The moment hit Kamala hard. She stood silently in front of the ruins. "They destroyed it," she whispered. Sundar didn't say anything. He walked to the stump, placed his hand gently on the rough bark, and stared at it for a long time. "But they didn't kill the roots," he finally said. Kamala looked at him. "We'll rebuild," he added, and he meant it. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Government officials launched investigations into dozens of cases linked to Rajat Malik. 2 officers were suspended. 1 was arrested. A new digital system was announced to protect old land records. And in the corner of a small neighborhood in Delhi, construction began. Not with machines, not with noise, but with people. Sundar returned with volunteers, young engineers, retired carpenters, architecture students. They cleaned the rubble. They brought paint and plants and hope. The neem stump. It stayed right where it was, because from its base a new shoot had begun to grow. Kamala watched it every morning like a guardian. She began serving chai to the workers. The news called her the grandmother of justice. She laughed every time she heard it. "I'm just a woman who wanted her home back," she'd say. But people didn't agree. To them, she was living proof that strength doesn't always shout. It sometimes whispers and still moves mountains. One evening, as the walls of her house stood tall again, freshly painted and new, Sundar sat on the front step. The sun was setting, throwing orange light across the dusty ground. Kamala came out with 2 cups of tea. "You never told me why you stopped that day," she said. He took the cup, smiled. "Because you looked like my mother." She nodded, understanding. "What Do you think she would say now? He looked at the tree sprout. She'd say, good, but don't stop here. Kamala chuckled. Then what's next? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out the notebook, and opened to a fresh page. In bold, clear handwriting, he wrote, Part 2 begins here. Then he closed it. That night, Raghav read an email out loud. Sir, it's from a woman in Kerala. She's 82. Her home was taken in a similar way 5 years ago. She says she never had the strength to fight. Until now, Sundar added. Yes, Raghav replied. She wrote, I don't need to win. I just need someone to hear me. Sundar leaned back in the chair. Then we'll listen. In a quiet corner of Delhi, under the soft light of a street lamp, a rebuilt home stood tall. And next to it, a small neem tree stretched toward the stars. Not old, not broken, but alive. The last word belongs to hope. The evening sun painted the sky in warm colors, burnt orange fading into soft purple. The narrow lanes of the neighborhood were quieter now, not because life had stopped, but because it had finally slowed down enough to breathe. Birds returned to trees. Families sat on their porches. Even the stray dogs curled up calmly beneath streetlights, as if the city, for the first time in a long time, had nothing to defend. On the edge of this peaceful scene stood a freshly painted house. The walls were white and clean, the windows open to let the wind in, and in the small patch of earth near the gate, a tiny neem tree reached upward. No longer a memory, but a beginning. Kamala Devi stood in the doorway, her shawl gently resting on her shoulders. In one hand, she held a brass plate of lit diyas. In the other, a photo of her late husband. She looked at the house, not for the design or the paint or the new furniture, but for something deeper. The way it stood, the way it welcomed her back like a long-lost child. You're home, she whispered. We are home. Inside, Sundar Pichai sat on a low wooden stool, sipping chai with Raghav and a few volunteers. There were no cameras, no microphones, no news vans outside anymore. The storm had passed, but what remained was more powerful than headlines. Sir, Raghav said, flipping through his tablet, there are now 84 new petitions filed by people across the country. Land disputes, evictions, false notices, all of them inspired by what happened here. Sundar nodded, not surprised. And donations, Raghav continued. People from India, the US, Australia, students, retired teachers, even school children. They're sending what they can. How much so far? Sundar asked quietly. 12 crores. Someone from the team let out a soft gasp, but Sundar didn't react. Instead, he simply leaned forward and said, How do we make sure it goes to the right people? We're already working with 3 non-profit legal teams, Raghav answered. We'll set up a trust, one you can't control directly. Sundar smiled. Good. This should never be about me. The next morning, a journalist from a respected publication visited Kamala's house. She had requested a quiet interview. No headlines, no drama, just a conversation. She sat across from Sundar under the neem tree. Mr. Pichai, she said, many believe you've changed the face of what justice can look like in this country. Others say you were lucky, right moment, right people. What do you say? Sundar looked at her for a long moment, then said slowly, I think I was just walking down a street, and I saw a woman sitting on the footpath with everything she owned in her lap, and I asked her a question. That's all. But why did you stop? The journalist asked. Most people wouldn't have. He thought back to that moment, the dust in the air, her trembling hands, the tired eyes that still refused to look away. Because if I had kept walking, he said softly, I wouldn't have liked the man I became. The journalist nodded, moved. Do you feel this is the end of your journey with this cause? He looked up at the tree above them. Its new leaves danced gently in the breeze. No, he said. This is just chapter 1. 3 weeks later, Sundar stood in front of a classroom of law students at a government college. He had come without security, without fanfare. He carried only one thing in his hand, a printout of Kamala's original land deed. He held it up. This paper was almost more powerful than this woman's voice, he said, but only almost. The students leaned in. You will graduate and enter a world full of contracts, loopholes, and legal tricks. But don't ever forget, your job is not just to win cases, it's to make sure the right person wins. He placed the paper down. One day, someone weaker than the system will walk into your office. No money, no support, just pain in their eyes. And you'll have to decide, do you look away or do you help? He paused, then added, whatever you choose in that moment will define the rest of your life. The students clapped, not loudly, but with something deeper, respect. Elsewhere in the country, Kamala's story began to live on. In a remote village, a teacher wrote her name on the chalkboard and asked students to write essays about courage. A small town in Bihar, a woman reopened her legal case against a developer who had stolen her land 5 years ago. In Chennai, Sundar's childhood neighborhood, someone planted a neem tree near his old school. They tied a ribbon around it and wrote one line on a stone, stand tall, even when cut down. But not all stories are clean, not all endings are smooth. A few weeks later, Rajat Malik was granted bail. He walked out of jail wearing a quiet smile. His lawyers claimed political targeting. His companies began restructuring. His allies returned one by one, and the world moved on. But something had changed. People watched now. People questioned now. People remembered. Rajat found that out when he visited a construction site one afternoon. Young worker refused to shake his hand. My father lost our house because of you, the boy said. And if Sundar sir hadn't spoken up, my mother would still be sleeping on the road. Rajat didn't answer, because there was no answer. Just silence. One evening, back in Delhi, Sundar and Kamala sat quietly on her porch. The house glowed in the golden sunset. Children played nearby. A volunteer was painting the final touch on the outside wall, a mural of the neem tree, its branches. Spreading wide, Kamala took a deep breath. You know what this feels like? She asked. What? Like peace. He nodded. You earned it. We earned it, she corrected. Then she stood up slowly and walked to the tree. She placed her palm on the bark and whispered something he couldn't hear. He stayed seated, smiling. A few minutes later, she came back and said, I asked the tree for one thing. What? To stay strong. So if someone like me ever sits beneath it again, it gives them shade. On his final day in Delhi before flying back to his work abroad, Sundar visited one last place, a small hill where construction workers were building low-cost housing for displaced families. He walked through the site, shook hands, asked questions, and listened. One of the women there came up to him with a shy smile. Sir, they say you helped a woman win her house back. She helped me remember why it matters, he said. Will you keep helping others? He looked at the hill, at the bricks and mortar, at the future being built one step at a time. As long as they need someone to listen, he said, I'll be there. And so, the man who had once been humiliated in a courtroom, who was doubted, threatened, and warned to walk away, chose to stand, chose to listen, and chose to fight for someone who had no voice. And because of that choice, thousands more found theirs.